States. There's the recording. So today we're really grateful to have you here. Myself and Mike and Reese and Michael and Charmaine have been working hard on a session for the AEA conference that's in a few short weeks. And really the purpose, it's a think tank style that we're going to be doing. And the idea is that we're hoping to kind of spark some thinking around Blue Marble for how people can apply Blue Marble principles and practices into their everyday evaluation work. So it's called Crafting Your Blue Marble Evaluation Story. And the idea is that we're going to share a little bit about some of the principles and start to kind of lay the groundwork for Blue Marble evaluation, but then really open up into breakout groups and try and facilitate some conversations around how you can apply these principles to your everyday work and to your evaluation practice as much and as frequently as possible, since we know how important that is in today's world. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael to get us started, and then we'll be off to the races. So thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Hannah, and greetings, everyone. I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of Blue Marble evaluation, and then we'll get into more of the details of an application for it. This is the picture of the Blue Marble taken in December of 1972 from the last Apollo mission, showing our home without borders or boundaries. And this month, NASA has created a new image of the Blue Marble that combines time-lapse photography over a period of time to actually get a finer grain, more dynamic picture of the Earth. And you can find this on the NASA site, although the colors aren't actually as brilliant as the original photo. So Blue Marble evaluation has emerged as an explicit way of supporting a more sustainable and equitable future based upon applying evaluation principles in a global context with local implications. And you'll be hearing about that in this session. What we know is that the planet and our future on it has been cast in doubt. We are the first generation to know that we are destroying the planet, and the last generation that can do anything about it. And so the future of our humanity, of all living beings on the Earth, as a form of acknowledging that we inhabit this planet with other species, with many different people. There are 8 billion plus people on the Earth, and that the ecosystems, the sustainability, the capacity of the planet to sustain life is a part of what human beings have been doing damage to. Evaluation then becomes a part of determining our future, because the call is for all hands on deck, that everybody needs to address issues of sustainability and equity at whatever level we can, because we are in what's now being called a polycrisis. I was just a year ago at this time in, as far as I know, the first major conference bringing together people who are specializing in what's being called the polycrisis, not looking at any given crisis like the pandemic or the growing inequities in the world, or the climate emergency, economic turbulence, the misinformation pandemic itself, the more severe weather, the increasing governance conflicts, go down the list, that these are overlapping crises. They are what's sometimes called a syndemic, interlocking epidemics. And so the context then for Blue Marble work has become looking at the ways in which crises are interconnected across silos and connecting our evaluation networks together to help deal with those crises. Things like climate change, economic turbulence, more refugees than at any time, a new virulent infectious diseases occurring, the dying oceans, global cyber terrorism, international drug cartels, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, poverty and inequality, multinational corporate collusion. The definition of these problems are disputed. The facts are a matter of intense debate. Politics and special interests dominate. The stakes are huge. And in Martin Luther King Jr., the largest quotation from him at the Washington, D.C. Memorial is this quote: "Every nation must now develop an overriding loyalty to mankind as a whole in order to preserve the best in their individual societies." And that's part of what Blue Marble evaluation supports. As Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same level of thinking that created them. And so Blue Marble evaluation offers a set of principles for evaluators to engage with these issues, beginning with the global thinking principle, that global problems like climate change, worldwide pollution, and global disparities require global interventions and correspondingly globally oriented world savvy evaluators, which means we need to apply whole earth, big picture thinking to all aspects of systems change, and that transforming systems with global and local interactions that you'll hear about is where Blue Marble evaluation has created a niche for engaging with these global problems. What you're going to hear about now are the applications of some of the specific principles that are a part of Blue Marble evaluation and ways of engaging with those, and inviting you then in the small groups to think about how you would apply these principles in your own work. Back to Hannah or Charmaine.
Yeah, I think Charmaine's kicking us off. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. And Michael has to go back to teaching a class, so he's going to leave us shortly. But he will be at AEA. So if you join us at the AEA session, you can hear more from him then. And of course, at our next community gathering in October. So thanks for kicking us off. And it's great to see so many familiar names in the participant list. I know many of you are no stranger to Blue Marble evaluation, and also some new names. So we always like to set the groundwork and make sure that folks get to hear the basic premise. But we are going to do some like mini case studies of how this has shown up in our work. And so I'm going to kick us off with just thinking about how I have tried to bring the Blue Marble perspective to work that I've done in the education sector. So I'm going to talk through a few of the principles, some of which Michael mentioned, and the full list of principles is on our website, how those have shown up in my work supporting the education sector. And I am an independent consultant, so I'm not working from within an organization, but that is how I started. And so I have kind of perspectives on both sides, working from within as an internal evaluator as well as an external evaluator. And in both roles, I think that skin in the game has always been how I've approached my evaluation work, because I work on issues that really are, that I care about, and I don't pretend like that's not the case. And in education in particular, it's gotten easier and easier as I have young children who are in schools. And so when I work with programs that are also working in schools, I have one client right now who's working in the same schools that my children attend. I do have to be careful about how I'm coming into that space, but really acknowledging that I have skin in the game, that I care about the way that our education system is operating, but not just for my kids, for all kids, and really seeing that as critical to making sure that what's happening in the schools and how the schools are trying to support both young people and engage with educators is making a difference. And so that one, I think, from the local level can be really important to acknowledge, particularly when it's been seen as something that could prevent you from being objective. Really laying it out there and talking about this idea of skin in the game, and then how that expands globally as well, that we all have a stake in how our world unfolds, how the Anthropocene unfolds. So the next principle is this idea of global thinking. And this one is a little bit more tricky, I have found, when I think about my work in the education system, because often folks are just really focused on their specific school, what's happening in their local communities. It's hard to see the forest for the trees, particularly in environments that are so intense and so localized in many ways as the education sector. But I think it's really important because of that, as someone who's coming from the outside to a certain extent, who's not in the weeds of a school or a district, to be able to shed light on some of the themes that I'm seeing happening globally with education. That a lot of the challenges with assessments, not measuring the things that educators want them to be measuring, and the stresses of COVID, for example, on the education system, which were so extreme, but not, and they played out differently in different districts to a certain extent, but there were also some pretty significant themes and lessons being learned across environments and across borders. And so really hoping to bring that perspective to the work that I'm doing with particularly folks in the education system, I think is really allows me to do that in ways that they aren't able to do often in their day-to-day lives. And so that's, I think, been a real value add for the education clients that I have, to think about how do we step back and see these broader themes and look to others for examples of what's working and not working, so that we're not just siloed in our thinking, which gets to the cross silos principle as well, because it's not just the education system that's dealing with a lot of these issues. Think about teacher retention, hiring bus drivers, things like that, that are really stressing our local education system. There are lessons that we can learn from other sectors about how they've addressed some of these issues. And it's easy to say, well, that's different with our system because of XYZ. And that's sort of yes, and right. There are things that make that very unique, and you can still bring in some of the lessons learned from other sectors. And so similarly to thinking across borders and across geographies, I'm able to say, well, here are some things that I'm learning from some of my other clients in other sectors that might be relevant to what you're trying to do in the education sector, and really make those connections in ways that, again, particularly when things are so stressful in the education sector, it's hard to do when you're inside of it. And so I'm able, as an external evaluator, to do that a little bit more easily, and then to think about how we can weave those lessons in as we go through the evaluation process, to keep coming back to that, so that it's not always on them to have to look outside, but that I can help bring that perspective when I do come in. Evaluation as intervention is another principle that is really, I think, this idea that I'm not just bringing the evaluation as a separate thing, but that it's really about how do we connect this evaluation to all of the other things that are happening in the school or the district that we're working with, so that it can be part of the design and really be used to support the transformation that they want to see. And so I think this connects to the transboundary engagement principle, which is, I think, this networked evaluation and engaging at a global scale. These have been, I think, more of a challenge for me, and something that I would love for this group to help think about is when I'm working particularly with a certain district that is not currently partnering with other districts, or there isn't a network existing, how do I bring that transboundary engagement piece? How do I connect to the local, to the global, more than just bringing the perspective of data for that district? How do I build those relationships, and is that my role? I have a new client that's working in the education system globally, and I see the potential to connect some of my local projects to that one, but that's not something that they're asking me to do. That's something that I will have to go out and figure out how to make happen. And there's not always opportunities for that. And so that I think has been the trickiest one for me, and something that I'm curious what other folks have found when you do have a more localized project. How do you bring, beyond just bringing data and perspectives to lessons, how do you actually bring that engagement piece and that action at a global scale, is something I'm still wrestling with. So I'll stop there. Just some of the thinking that I've been doing, and I look forward to hearing others' thoughts. But now I'm going to pass it to Reese to talk about what she's learned in the climate change sector.
Thanks, Charmaine. Hi, everyone. I'm Reese Warren. I have spent the last 10 years focused on climate monitoring, evaluation, and learning. I am currently at the Bezos Earth Fund. And I'm just starting with the Anthropocenas context. I spent last weekend hiking in Sequoia National Park. And in the last 5 years, they've lost 9 to 13% of all mature sequoias to wildfire. And they're just these things that every day kind of hit you in the face. So wicked problems, we have to think about them differently. And I realized while I was working through this that we were talking about crafting our story, and my story is really around transformational alignment. How do we transform evaluation in order to evaluate transformation? I can't tell you how many projects or project designs I've looked at or implementation I've looked at where people said, oh, this is absolutely transformational. And it wasn't. It was really business as usual with a little tweak. So part of what we have to do is help people think about what transformation really is and the theory of transformation, ensuring designing and evaluating transformation based on an evidence supported theory of transformation is really important. And really what I think people often don't want to engage in that, but making that thinking visible, I think, is really important to be able to look at how you can go beyond what we've been doing for so long and do something different, and who are all of the actors and stakeholders that need to be engaged in order to do that. Cross silos, I think, is incredibly important for the big problems we're working on. One of the things that we did at the Bezos Earth Fund early on, and this is not a commercial for us, but we decided not to work in programs. So we said these are complex problems. We need to bring everybody's expertise to them. So we decided to work in initiatives that go cross-sectoral. For instance, one of the things we're working on is designing, how do we think about reducing fossil fuel dependence? And how do we think about the communities that are affected by that? So we're working on an initiative now that looks across the value chain from extraction of fossil fuels to their use in electricity generation to their use in production. And how do we work with communities across that value chain to reduce dependence while at the same time keeping communities whole? And that's taking most of the people on our staff to think about. Yin yang is really at the center of a lot of how we're approaching things. I've been on the edges of quite a few debates where some people are passionately saying you can't invest in certain kinds of renewable energy, and you can't do extraction of carbon from the atmosphere, because doing that, you're allowing industry to pollute more. And you have to focus on frontline communities because they are the ones most effective and they're the ones who are most able to make change. So yin and yang, but I think both are true. We have to do both. We can't ignore either of them. We did at our last all staff meeting, we did an exercise where you were voting with your feet, and we had people go to one side of the room if they thought it was okay to fund work that was just climate mitigation with no attention to social impacts and climate justice. And to the other end of the room, it was okay to invest in climate justice that didn't have appreciable carbon reduction aspects. And we had about a third of the people on each side of the room and a third of the people in the middle. And as we talked about it, people started moving towards the middle. And granted, some of that I think was social pressure, but also it got us really engaged in a conversation about how we do things. So part of it is what you do, but a really important aspect of it is how you do it. So we are doing director capture, but we're trying to do it in a way that incorporates at the center ways of thinking about who's affected by it. What are the potential unintended consequences? How do you proactively bring in groups that might be marginalized into the work in authentic ways? So then, time being of the essence, oh my God, urgency, right? And everybody says, we have to do this now. We can't wait. An ex post evaluation is too late. Well, yeah, in a lot of cases it is. So you have to build an evaluation from the beginning, and you need to build an evaluative thinking. I also hear a lot of, Reese, monitoring takes precious time from grantees. They really need to be out there doing the work. We can't ask them to do this accountability work. Well, yes, accountability is one thing, but learning is another. If we're not monitoring, if we're not paying attention to what is actually making a difference and where things are blocked, then we don't know how to adapt and change and grow in what we're doing and how to support grantees. So we really need to build in monitoring or some kind of tracking that checks on vital signs, not necessarily accountability, but vital signs that help us learn and adapt. I also hear a lot of, we have to act now. We don't have time to do slow planning. And okay, yes, I hear that. At the same time, because it sounds scary to take the time to think through a theory of transformation because we have to run. But if we don't think through that, then we risk wasting time and money. I keep hearing, and I say this too, we're building the plane while we're flying it. Yeah, we are. But the plane is not going to fly unless you have brought in what you know about physics and metallurgy and electronics, and if you're not testing wing design at different wind speeds. So building on what we know from the past and building in ways of thinking and experimenting as we're going becomes extremely important. And our work is always standing on past work. We recently did an evaluation with ClimateWorks, Hewlett, and SIF of climate change work in China. And one of the conclusions from the evaluation was that if Hewlett and others had not invested in local organizations for years, then they wouldn't have had experienced staff on hand who had already built trust with decision makers that enabled the research that they were doing to be used. So time is of the essence, bringing in the past. And then that gets me back to transforming evaluation. I don't know what the word is. We need a concept that helps us come in project design, in project implementation, and not just at the end for evaluation. And I'm really hoping we find a way to do that. And I love that Michael's built that throughout Blue Marble. I'm going to pass it over to him.
Thanks, Reese. Thanks, Charmaine. Even just you two talking, I'm like, ooh, there's a new thing that I can carry with me. And it really excites me, which is why we wanted to do the session. So like I said, I'm an evaluator at the Centers for Disease Control, which is a public health federal agency. And I'm in a newly formed center at the agency that's focused solely on public health infrastructure and workforce. So I'm very much involved in systems-focused work. We're in an office that does kind of data reporting and evaluation at that kind of systems level. Obviously, we all know after COVID, there were a lot of systems problems highlighted, exacerbated, worsened within the system during the past, 4-5 years now, which feels crazy. And when I read Blue Marble at the end of last year, it just sparked for me a lot of different ways that I think I can show up as an evaluator in my day-to-day work to try and influence and champion some of this work that I think is so vital to move us forward globally. And I think it just really excited me, which is what led to this session today. So some principles that really live at the front of my brain, or I try to bring myself back to. I always have my book, on my desk so I can think about ways to bring these conversations to the forefront in our evaluation work. The first is the transformative engagement principle. Obviously this is a big problem. We need to have a public health system that works for everyone, that is able to avoid catastrophes like COVID. And so it's really important. This is a highly passionate area of mine. I have a lot of skin in the game, and I feel really strongly that we should not just be doing business as usual. I've been trying to champion and start conversations around transformation, which is a struggle, and something I'd love to hear how others are kind of grappling with, to try and help others at the agency adopt some of this transformative mindset and really thinking through a theory of transformation, not just thinking about this funding intervention, this funding intervention, this funding intervention, but weaving some of those theory of changes together to really think about, well, where do we really need to be? And how do we get there on a bigger picture instead of just focusing so specifically, on this intervention, this program, this program, this program. So thinking through that bigger theory of transformation has definitely been at the forefront for me, and just trying to get others to be thinking in that way too. And then the global principle, integrating interconnections across all levels. I'm always trying to zoom in and zoom out. I think it's a struggle sometimes being at a higher federal level. You're not always as boots on the ground, and I miss that work dearly, but I do believe that being at this higher level, I can try and be a voice to try and connect down to individuals and communities that we're affecting and serving, and making sure that they have a voice at the table, that they're highlighted in data collections, and that we're really thinking through all of those interconnections. I think especially during COVID, there was such a breakdown between those different interconnections. And I think that we really need to strengthen not only how federal works with local and state, and how federal can work with even higher global levels, but just making sure that it's not so hierarchical, and that we really are interconnected and thinking through how these different interactions work together. For time being of the essence, Reese spoke to this also. I think it's really easy to think that everything needs to be a rush. I'm certainly guilty of that. Like I said, we all have a lot of skin in the game in our work and feel very passionate about it. And I think it's really easy to think that everything has to be fast. I can't tell you how many strike teams, tiger teams, sprint teams have popped up around the agency in the last few years. And I keep joking with everyone, like, I want to do an evaluation of if those are actually working and doing anything, because I don't think we're always thinking about the fast and slow thinking. Sometimes we do have to be deliberate and slow and intentional to have that sustainable long-term change that we know is needed. And I think it's really easy sometimes in the face of these huge, daunting global problems to want to run and to not think through, like Reese was saying. I love that, the plane analogy. I use that all the time, but I love thinking about it with, like, you got to have the physicists and you got to have the, architects. You got to have these people at the table from all these different groups and silos, and make sure you're being deliberate so that everything isn't a rush and you're having to redo it in 2 years or restart your evaluation because you didn't think through this because you were moving too fast and overworked. And so I try my best in certain conversations to pause and to have people think instead of just making decision that might have negative impacts on the system. And lastly, this one really sticks out to me too, the bricolage method. So this is really about kind of using context-specific and utilization-focused evaluations and diverse methods to match your evaluation situation. I work at an agency that's very traditionally scientific, a lot of statistical analyses, a lot of surveillance work. Not knocking that, obviously that's hugely important, but I'm always trying to, again, think about how do we think outside the box of that? How do we bring in these different methods, these different data sources to really tell a more robust story, and to be able to get data that we can actually use to influence these systems, to bring to these conversations and tables that can make change. We've had a lot of conversations lately around data to action focused evaluations, which draws a lot on utilization focused principles. And again, just really thinking outside the box and not just defaulting to, oh, we just have to get these performance measures and do this outcome evaluation, because where is that really getting us where we need to be, knowing the magnitude of the change that we need in this system? So those are a few that, like I said, kind of stick out to me pretty regularly, and I try and bring myself back to, especially when it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. I think that's why I love these principles, is that it challenges me as an evaluator to think differently and to show up differently. That skin in the game, I mean, it's real. And I think the more that all of us can think through how to show up in these ways that help contribute, the more we can move the needle in the right direction in all these systems. So I'm hoping now we can move into more of a discussion and hear from all of you about how you're kind of thinking through how these principles could be applied to your daily work and how you can kind of create and craft your story around Blue Marble evaluation. Charmaine, how many people did we end up with? We had talked about doing breakout rooms depending on how many, got about
Yeah, so if we
15?
do 3 rooms, we'd have about 4 or 5 per room.
Okay.
But also some folks are invited if they'd like to stay in the main room. If you have either ideas for engaging this network specifically, or questions, like if you're brand new and you're like, whoa, let's just back up a little. So I'm going to stay in the main room. So yeah, the question is, do we want bigger or smaller breakout rooms, I guess, at that point?
4 to 5 people sounds
Good.
good.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna randomly assign you to 3 breakout rooms. And if you need to leave, that's totally understandable. I'm also gonna pause the recording right now so that we don't accidentally record the breakout rooms. I'm gonna resume the recording. Welcome back. Any major themes that came out of the conversations, or aha moments that anyone would like to share with the larger group?
I can say in our group, I think we had a couple of good conversations around, okay, how do we really start applying some of these principles, right? And kind of thinking a lot about the context and how to adopt them and apply them kind of simultaneously, and had a lot of great examples from those in our group about how they've applied some of the principles and had some challenges and successes. We ended on a great note of really thinking intentionally about what skin in the game means. It doesn't just mean showing up and having passion. It means giving up power and being really intentional about how you show up in those situations and in those conversations, which I thought was just a great way to end our conversation. But yeah, a lot of great insights from our group for sure.
And anyone else have something they want to bring into the large group? A shy group. Okay, that's fine. You can also put it in the chat. And one of the things that we were talking about, oh, Reese, you unmuted. So you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say that Debbie and Thomas in our group talked about the importance of advocacy with commissioners and helping teach commissioners about Blue Marble evaluation, so that each time we do that, they're a little more receptive or more interested in looking beyond the accountability.
That's a great point. And, I feel like that comes up enough that I wonder if there's a space for us to do a targeted webinar, something for, that audience specifically. Like, what could that look like, the commission of Blue Marble evaluation? And or how can you weave that into your existing evaluation commission? So yeah, it's some food for thought, because I think that comes up most times, is how do we get the funders and the folks behind the RFPs to actually think about this more intentionally. Thank you. Well, last call, any other comments?
Yeah, we were just kind of going in that direction in our discussion. We discussed, that's difficult. We're at different extremes. I was I'm very new where I'm working in overall, and I got a chance to speak with Michael, who's has a lot of experience, and in one place in particular. And so it's difficult to influence change. We started talking about, well, as evaluators, can we maybe think about adding some way to bring information what are we measuring or getting data on that speaks to something maybe cross silo or wider systems impact that will give us something to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, then we had two kind of pieces that we wanted to do here at the end. One is just to say that this is a little bit of a dry run for AEA. We recognize that what we brought to the table today were primarily American focused, US focused evaluators, although some of us are working more globally, but based in the US because we came together in a collaboration for the American Evaluation Association conference. So that is where we plan to redo this presentation. And so we would love your feedback about how you feel like we could potentially adapt or change or use what we learned from this to bring to that context. So I do have a Mentimeter that I'm going to share with you. And here is the direct link of just any thoughts you have, suggestions for adapting this presentation to AEA specifically. And we're also particularly interested in if you had ideas for, like, should we do topic specific breakouts, or do you like that it was more general? Like, would it have been useful to have them be on specific principles or specific sectors? We wanted to leave it open and see what came out of that. So if you have feedback or suggestions, please put those in there. And then also, just to say that the Blue Marble Network, we just moved it to a new platform. And so if you had a profile on the old one, it's moved over to the new platform, but you do have to update your password, and you can update your profile as well and add different information. And now it's much more searchable, and we can find each other more easily in various countries and skill sets and that sort of thing. So I'm hoping it will be an easier to use platform for finding folks. It's still not in and of itself like an engagement platform so much. We'll still use LinkedIn for posting things because I've found that people just don't go to a separate platform for that. But it's nice to have a place where you can potentially find other evaluators working on certain things. So hopefully that will continue to be useful. And if you have ideas for other community gatherings, we're going to continue these through the year. So we'll have October, November, and December, the third Thursday at 9 a.m. Central. When we switch to daylight savings time, I think that bumps us to a different UTC time. So I'll be sure to send that information out. But that is what's coming up for us in Blue Marble. And really grateful that you all came back. And I don't see a lot of responses on the Mentimeter. Oh, maybe I have to go like this. Oh, no, I don't. Okay. Well, if you have them, we will see them. If you don't have any feedback, that's fine too. But I will keep checking. I will check up on what comes through, and feel free to put it in the chat, or you've got our Blue Marble email as well, I think. Any closing thoughts from Hannah, Reese, or Matt? Mike, sorry.
Just thank you for participating today. We were a great discussion, and we're excited to bring it to AEA. So yeah, if you have any feedback, we welcome it. I think AEA will probably be a little bit of a larger group and maybe have a little bit more diversity in terms of familiarity with Blue Marble evaluation and how they've applied it. And so I think there might be a few more fresh faces there that hopefully will get excited and maybe even join the network. So we welcome any thoughts or ideas from you after the session too.
Thanks, everybody. Let's stop the recording. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.